Close, close, close. Closing windows because I don't need them to show up on stream. Not that they do, I don't think, but just in case. Do 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 do. Go back to 3 players. We'll go Deep of Night, why not? Just have a fun little Deep of Night run that'll probably end in failure, because they always do. Oh, I'm so negative. I need to stop that. Well, we'll go with Undertaker. Why not? I like to pretend that I'm good with Undertaker, so let's just keep the self-deception train going, shall we? I do apologize for the relative busyness of the screen, but I figured you might be interested in seeing what items are in the item slot in left hand, so I decided to move Lambda to on top of the item, so this way you can sit there and judge me about how I have, I don't know, some other hammer that's not good in my left hand. I've seen streams where people complain that the streamer doesn't have all the pertinent information available on screen, so ideally the runes will be somewhat visible. Oh wait, they're in the upper right, so of course they are. For some reason I was thinking regular Elden Ring, where they're in the bottom right. I decided today to try to stream later than my usual hours because turns out people are more awake during the day and willing to watch streams of Nightreign and so on during daywalker hours versus, you know, 3 in the morning. This is technically late at night for me, but I decided to just go ahead and just do this because I felt like streaming and I didn't really want to do Resident Evil again because I just got blindsided just instantly. I'm not doing well with the allegations that I'm not actually good at this game. Maybe I just need to quit playing Undertaker in general. It's doing just fine earlier in a run with where I was playing Duchess, but now I just I I guess that's their performance anxiety that I referenced the other day. Almost caused damage. What? Okay, whatever. We'll try that. I also decided it would be fun to try to do a Deep of Night run. Maybe I can find... It's the giant rat that makes all the rules! Oh no! He more or less trapped me in there. Outrageous. Anyway, I've been trapped in, like, Deep of Night level 2 for, like, months now. I desperately want to get out of there one way or the other. And maybe I'll actually do well this time. I doubt it, but who knows. You gotta have confidence, kids. You also gotta not just stand right directly in the Red Wolf's exact line of fire. That would probably also help. What was... I recall that dog having a name in regular Elden Ring, but I don't remember what it was. It was like Radagon's Wolf of something or other. It was in the Rhea Lucaria. But I don't remember what he was actually called there, where in this one it's just the Red Wolf. In regular Elden Ring he was just like Radagon's Red Wolf, I think was his name. What in the hell even happened? I don't... Was he swinging? Did I just fly directly into his halberd? What the hell? Oy. This is not encouraging. Not encouraging in the slightest. But anyway, I typically like to have some sort of topic to ramble tangent about. I don't necessarily have one in mind today. I'm kind of just freewheeling here. I kind of want to talk about Ciconia, the 5th When They Cry game from Ryukishi 07. It's not always going to be visual novels that I talk about. I don't know if it'll even always be video games, because who knows, despite... You know, it's a... Come on now. You're better than this. And I'm just not gonna rage quit, that's stupid. But, it's not always gonna be visual novels because, you know, I can only assume so many people are so interested in visual novels. You know, you don't come to... I don't think you come to a Nightreign stream to hear about what's going on in the wild, exciting world of books. Electronic books. Maybe you do. Maybe I'm tapping into a secret unknown market. But I kind of want to talk about Ciconia because I want to for my own benefit, because I usually rewatch these streams after this is all said and done, because I want to see how much of an idiot I sound like, I want to more or less just like write down what I feel are some of the more tangible points that I can bring up about Ciconia when I talk about it in a more tightly produced, not rambling ass playing Nightreign sort of way. This is going very poorly. It's like base Elden Ring all over again. You just start the game and the tree sentinel just kicks your ass up, down, left, and right. This is ridiculous. The only difference is, you know, I don't like the ring finger. I don't like it. It's just, I know it's funny because it looks like a finger. It does the big swelling to flick your enemies, but I don't like it. Never have. But anyway, I like to... This is, as promised in one of my descriptions somewhere, that this is me going over my writing process somewhat. I like to sort of vocalize some of the points I want to try to cover in my various documents that I have on my computer, just about whatever I feel like trying to talk about in the moment. So I want to have like it on the record, kind of some of my thoughts and so on about what goes on in Ciconia Phase 1 for you, the replaceable ones. Or if I talk about it again, it will come up, Euphoria. The visual novel that has it's infamous more than famous, I think. Should I go? I'm gonna go get that item. I don't know what it is, but I'm gonna go. I'll catch up with these guys in a minute. But I just like to have... I routinely just like rewatch my own particular streams because I upload these on YouTube, so I like to make sure that I don't sound awful, that the sound in the game isn't awful. I don't really want to put out a thing that's just, you know, several hours, 2+ hours of just like garbled audio where I'm drowning myself out playing Resident Evil 2 and trying to make some sort of point about Final Fantasy 16. By what an oddly specific example. But I want to be able to also just... When I rewatch these, I also like to try to get something out of it. I don't want to just... It feels kind of masturbatory to just, you know, do the stream, rewatch the stream, make sure that it sounds alright, post it on YouTube, watch it again, just to be like, I like the sound of my own voice. I kinda don't. I think a lot of people don't like the sound of their own voice. This is hardly a unique position. But, you know, I don't want to just... What are you doing, Atro? What are you doing? Dude, just go. Just go. Get out of here. Get out of here, crazy kid. We can swing back after this, after the first boss. But I like to get something out of these where I feel like, yes, I made something approaching a good point, or to use in either a video later on or just in my own personal like text documents, because sometimes I like to write my analyses as just, you know, text. It's not necessarily all video. I think you can convey things better via words on a paper versus spoken aloud. Like, there's times in the Resident Evil stream where I mentioned things that were just, like, blatantly wrong, but at the time I didn't catch it because it sounded correct, but referencing something in that released in, like, 1988 when really it was 1998 and I just misspoke, I can catch this in a text document, whereas spoken, I can't. I can't vocal backspace that. So I find these helpful to just be able to replay some of my thoughts, so I can be like, oh yeah, I wanted to talk about for Ciconia, for instance, like the characterization of Super Genius Jaden, or something like that. I don't know. I don't know if, again, I don't know if this is even that's even gonna be the topic of today's ramble tangent. Because I kinda don't know how many people care about Ciconia at all, period. I referenced it in my first Nightreign stream that I think Ciconia is underrated and not as popular as Higurashi and Umineko, because I do think that's true. Higurashi and Umineko, they got the benefit of their actually finished series, whereas Ciconia theoretically will be finished, but it's looking dicey. I don't know why my audio keeps freaking out like this. It's... You do the thing just fine forever, for days at a time, and then all of a sudden, just one day, your audio just decides, your equipment just decides, oh, we're not working now. And it's like, come on. For God's sake, man. This is just a poor showing on my part all the way around this time. Maybe I shouldn't play Undertaker on stream. I did well as the Guardian, but I don't know, this Undertaker run, this run is just... it's gone to the dogs. You know what, you guys could just leave me dead, it's fine. They can't even hear me. But that's the thing that I always do, regardless of the medium I'm choosing to vocalize my thoughts in. When I was doing most of the Higurashi playthrough, for instance, you were at full health. What the hell? These other guys are going to just quit the game, and it's going to be entirely your fault. And you know what? I don't blame them. If I didn't have witnesses, I probably also would just abandon me as soon as humanly possible. But unfortunately, this here is keeping me on my best behavior. I don't turn my back on Mother Nature. But, when doing any of the, you know, writing, posting about Higurashi, Umineko, Silent Hill F for a time, I would routinely reread my own words after I posted it just to see that it flowed well. I don't know if it's necessarily good, you know, I don't know what people think of my own writing. I only know what I think of my writing. And eventually, you just gotta kill your babies and move on. You can't dwell on them forever, otherwise you're gonna get nothing done. Okay, I thought that was the recluse for some reason, just taking a swing at me. I was like, what are you doing? I'm terribly unobservant today. But, I like to reread my own stuff because, one, I am egotistical this way. I kind of think my own writing is good. But also, I just want to make sure that I was able to convey whatever points I was trying to make without sounding like an absolute moron. Whether or not I succeed is up to, you know, other people's perspective. For all I know, I sound like I'm a drooling moron who doesn't know how to string two words together without going the whole entire time. But, you know, you can't tell this via text because I control the words. I control what you see. Whereas here, you're seeing me completely unfettered. Unedited, as if you will. What even? Okay. Would you believe that I've played this game for nearly 200 hours across 2 systems, and I've never noticed that before? I somehow have gone through the entire game multiple times, you know, going through all the Night Lords as all the classes, except for Scholar, because I don't know if you can actually play him solo to any real good degree, and I've never noticed that. Incidentally, man, I just have nothing but respect for people who can actually play, like, Recluse well. I'm not going to say that Atro's doing this well. This is... I don't want to give him a big head, even though he can't hear me. Atro, you son of a bitch. I hate you. But, you know, I envy people who can play Recluse well, who can play Executor well. He's the generic guy, but I think Wilder is the most popular chosen character for a reason, you know? But, back to the editorial process. I write my stuff. Or, just to talk about the Higurashi playthrough that you see on my Tumblr, 8-Bit Supervillain, or 8-Bit Adventure VNs. It's, I make my little introductory posts. Usually, I try to write, like, 4 or 5 of these posts at a time, because there's a picture limit on Tumblr. You're allowed only 30 pictures per post, so eventually... Why in the hell am I not getting, like, any sort of decent hammers? This always happens. I never get good hammers. I almost took that dagger, but I forgot that because I forgot for a second that I'm not playing Duchess. I'm playing Recluse. Not Recluse, I'm playing Undertaker. Atro's the Recluse. Believe it or not, I can actually string words together. I don't normally just sound... Is it because it's so late for me? Should I just go to bed? But anyway. The Higurashi playthrough, right? Each one of those, after a while, the first dozen or so were all different because I wasn't sure whether or not I was going to actually like cover the entire series. I was just sort of like drive-by posting, just like, hey, look at this in chapter 1, Onikakushi Hen. It's like, here's this, and it's like, huh, that was dumb. I didn't like that. But eventually, in chapter 2 Watanagashi, I started getting more and more in-depth in my posting, my analysis. And on Tumblr, you're limited to 30 pictures per... What the fuck? Okay. I'm gonna go kill this Tricephalos because this is just aggravating me now. You know, you're only allowed a certain amount of pictures per post, 30 in this case. And, so I would have to, you know, post my thoughts relative to the 30 or so pictures I was able to get in the post at each time. Now, this isn't a hard and fast rule. You don't have to. I don't use all 30 pictures. Sometimes, if I feel like it would be better to go with less. Less is more, you know? Brevity is the soul of wit. And this is true because eventually, after a while, you just sound like you're just, like, more or less just sort of recapping the whatever it is you're talking about. Oh, for God's sake, you stupid dog. These are not good dogs, they're not good boys. I hope when they die, they go to super hell. At least I didn't call them puppers or doggos. Can be slightly not embarrassing for once. Okay, give me the mark of avarice, come on. Make with the money, moneybags. So, but at the time, my writing process for the various chapters sort of changed toward the end, where I would more or less just like read ahead in a given chapter and just sort of go back and recap and then explain what I thought was going on versus what did happen. And it became a lot more past tense type of posting instead of just my earliest posts. Up through chapter 6 was more in the moment posting about what was going on in the narratives versus, you know, just talking about how this happened and then this happened and da 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 da. I don't. Okay. Sure, we'll go with this. Pretend like that's useful to me. But I would, earlier on, I would just sort of post like more in the moment type of posts about how, you know, this recent plot development happened and it annoyed me because it made me think that the protagonist is, you know, just like a bumbling buffoon. Perhaps this is because it became more just like reactionary and just like recappy. Because when I did Chapter 8, Matsuribayashi, I will one day stop talking about this, but today is not that day. Look forward to the year 2030 when eventually I stop talking about this. in my madness, I decided to go through that chapter 8 separate times. I read the release itself. I read it, once to read the thing. I read it again to get screenshots. I read it again because I enjoyed it. I read it a fourth time because I wanted to do this. And then I read the old translations from when the series first came out back in like 2008, 2009, in English, anyway. I can't even take this. I would give up my avarice. There's a metaphor there somewhere. But, I read through the chapter 8 times because I read the translation you can currently buy on Steam. I read the old translation from when the series first came out in 2009 or so in English. I read the translation again with a edit to where it was the PlayStation 2 version of the game. It's the exact same narrative as the 2009 one, but I was going with the 2002 PlayStation game art because I was curious if they leaned more into like common language of the time versus today versus the original translation and so on. And then because I did that, I might as well read the manga, right? So I read the manga, and then I watch the anime, which is an adaptation of a visual novel that was 40 hours. Slightly more than 40 hours. I think I put in like 60 on my first playthrough. And that's not just me being a slow reader. There's just like a lot in there, and so I seem to recall it being about like 50 hours or so. So, I did the visual novel 6 separate times. I did the manga, I did the anime. I did the visual novel again because the anime left a really bad taste in my mouth because I wanted to see what they had to cut out because you've only got 12 episodes, 12 20-minute episodes to work, 50 plus hours worth of narrative in there. So obviously something's going to get cut, and I was like, wow, they cut out a lot. And eventually I went through this multiple times. I even went so far as to see if there was like a fan translation of the original because I wanted to see what people thought back then about the finale, what went on then, but I never found a fan translation. Instead, I just found the originals and applying that translation to the PlayStation 2 versions of the game, which was an interesting read because there is a lot of stuff in the PS2 version because Matsuribayashi at the time didn't exist when the PS2 versions of Higurashi came out, so they had to just like slap together sprites and so on from the earlier chapters. Hanyu, for instance, she only ever had her Shrine Maiden outfit / Oyashiro costume, but you also had just like people reusing sprites from Higurashi and earlier to do stuff with Matsuribayashi. It's actually kind of commendable how much effort people spent on that. But there wasn't just like a fan translation where they just took another shot at it. So I go through the series, the volume, 8 separate times. 9, technically. Because after a while, I just sort of fast-forwarded to reread parts that... I wonder if that shows if that's audible. Anyway, eventually, while going through the visual novel again as the original and the PlayStation version, I just sort of fast-forwarded to see how individual plot points were handled back then compared to today. For instance, in the Steam release, the military unit that's subordinate to the villain are called the Mountain Dogs, but in the original 2009 PlayStation 2 versions, they're referred to as the Mountain Hounds. The names of the units in the Mountain Hounds were called something else versus in the Steam release where it's like, you know, you got bird names, and in the 2009 version it's like the Japanese name equivalent of the names. It's like instead of crow, it's like Kurosu and things like that. But, you know, it's just I wanted to see like what plot point differences were with like the connecting fragments, the Neo Takano tragic backstory, the character assassinations, that sort of thing. I wanted to see how those played out. It is remarkable that I'm doing this well, considering I've got nothing good weapon-wise. This has just been a real bad run this entire time. So, but like, in my original Higurashi playthroughs, you know, Watanagashi, etc., I would remark upon how I had to stop reading because the protagonist, Keiichi, he was just like intolerably stupid. There's a part in Watanagashi, I don't remember showing up in Mayakashi, but spoilers for Watanagashi. It's said that the villain of that particular chapter, Mion, air quotes, is the one who did all the murders because there was a rumor back in the day that the Sonozaki family was feeding soldiers on the Japanese front cans filled with human flesh, basically. And so because the Sonozakis at the time were being persecuted against because of the cannibalism, this left a bunch of the Sonozakis in like a bad state, and so Mion was more or less getting revenge after the fact against people who spread this rumor and lie. And Keiichi is told this, and he's just like, oh, Mion, it's so tragic that you killed these people that you had absolutely no other reason to do. I don't blame you. I wish I could take the rap for you for these murders. And it was just, he was just this weird, like, riddled with guilt because his friend committed a bunch of murders against people who were innocent, and it was just odd. It was just like, well, okay, good luck with all that, Spider-Man. And I just had to stop reading because Keiichi was like, he was just blubbering and crying because it's so sad, it's so tragic. And it just upset me, annoyed me at the time, and I even mentioned this in my Watanagashi read-through, where it was like, Keiichi is getting manipulated so hard, it is astonishing how dumb he is. Reina, meanwhile, who's also there, she hears all this, and she's just like, it sucks that this happened to you. Cannibalism ain't no joke, but, you know, you did still kill literal children. You killed Rika and Satoko. I'm not exactly brimming with sympathy for you. And it's like, yes, Serena, get her ass. And I think both of my writing styles had their own merit, but I think that the more or less going as I went through the series, if that statement makes any sort of sense, was better because it was more emotionally driven. You know, you got me just sort of recapping everything in Matsuribayashi. It's like, here's all this. But, you know, I didn't really express surprise about, you know, Takano getting manipulated by someone else to do things. I didn't really express any sort of like shock about when Takano Sr. got embarrassed by the government guys who were there to hear about his research into Hanamisawa syndrome. But I padded this out somewhat by talking about how I don't understand the characterizations of certain characters relative to how they had been done in the past. At some points, even earlier in the chapter itself. So, also when I just started talking about the old translations, the PlayStation 2 translation, etc., I more or less just use this as an excuse to have my conspiracy theories about Hanyu and her people, the demons of Onigafuchi, Oyashiro, all that. Which I have to bring up again later on. When I get through the rest of Somei Atsushi, but my god, this is taking forever. I do take notes while reading the visual novels, the chapters. It's not even just a Higurashi thing. I take notes when reading basically anything these days. It's not exactly like the deepest narrative in the world, but I have a notes document for the visual novel Mojika, which I don't know if I'm going to actually talk about that to any real degree, because based on some of the actions of the character, I don't know if I can get away with talking about these legitimately. How come? Why has my ultimate gauge not been filling up? Is it because of this Nox hammer? But I have notes documents about Euphoria, since I've been rereading that, for a completely different document I've been writing about visual novels, which I might make into an actual video. I have notes about Euphoria. I have notes about this Western visual novel, Shining Superstar Nova. Shining Song Star Nova, I think it's called, actually. I have notes about that because I've had previously written a review of it, but I didn't get most of the points I wanted to make out, because I just sort of got annoyed and just verbally, mentally, psychically stun-locked because I couldn't vocalize / put to paper what I meant by some of the things that happened, and my process of just at some points just like writing things to see what sticks, to see if I can somehow wrangle this point back to the topic at hand, it wasn't working. Kind of related to how the story of Starnova goes. I don't think some of that story works. Also, it has a really bizarre reference to the movie Tropic Thunder. But that's neither here nor there. But I have these documents about visual novels, games I'm playing. I even write notes about movies, TV shows, that sort of thing. Even though I never really bothered talking about movies, because I don't think movies... I don't watch movies, really. For some reason, I can justify watching a 6-hour review of... a 9.5-hour review of the game LA Noire, but I can't watch a 2-hour movie because I don't think that's a good use of my time. Or... let's watch a Magic the Gathering show that I've watched the same episode 12 times before, let's do it again. But, you know, an hour-and-a-half movie, that's a big ask. It's a big ask. Ah, that was terrible. I should really cut that. But, I just sort of keep these notes about the media I'm currently consuming because I like to talk about whatever it is I'm reading, watching, in the case of how worthy of listening to. I just like to have notes about these sorts of things. I suppose it's technically like content creator brain, but I just like to have these little documents, these little notes about how, like when watching Alien Earth, for instance, I have some notes that I wrote about that where more or less it just resulted in character equals stupid. Character equals stupid? What even is going on with this narrative? That sort of thing. But I just enjoy having my little documents about a given thing at a time. It's a relatively new development. It's not something I've ever done previously, but for the past, 16 years I've been doing this. Some of my writing back then is awful. I still have my old documents from 2012 or so, and it's like, they let this guy write. How has the school system failed us so? Go Guardian again. But I just like to have a little reference to myself for if I ever decide I want to talk about a given thing. It's kind of sad to say, this is sort of like I keep notes about things just so if I talk to people, I can actually refer to, things in movies, show, etc., and just be like, oh yes, I thought that when this happened, I thought da-ba-da-da-da-da. Did you notice how this? Whereas, if I didn't do that, it would just be like, hey, did you watch I don't know, let's just pick a random show. Reacher. The Amazon Reacher. It's like, did you watch Reacher? It's like, yeah, it's a show. I liked it when the big muscly man punched a guy. I have not watched Reacher. But I just like to have a little note document. I don't have my computer on me all the time, obviously, but it's like I can memorize my conversational topics, so that way I can sound normal and not just sort of disassociate, I guess. But I primarily just keep these just in case it's like, well, who knows? Maybe in the future I could talk about topic X, Y, and Z. Maybe I will get around to writing my thoughts about the final third of the episodes of Revolutionary Girl Utena, for instance. I have some takes about that are, I don't want to say problematic, but it's like, I don't really think the show is quite as deep as people think it is. I mean, you take away what you take away, but it's like, I think you're going to hurt yourself with that much of a reach. But I just sort of, I wanted to have just like a little thing I can reference, so if I bring up how in any given topic about, if I reference a thing that eventually I'm just like, oh yeah, that was a great point that I made, that was a great thought that I had, what was it? I can actually come back to it and be like, ah yes, it was this. I might zhuzh it up a bit, so that way it sounds more presentable than just this ramble tangent. But, you know, you gotta quit standing in poison acid, man. Maybe you should have gone Undertaker again. That way you could Johns your way into saying that's why you're doing badly, instead of just you're bad at the video game. Also, another thing I really want to try not to do in my streams is reference videos that I watched about things. You don't need me to tell you to go watch a theory crafting video about, again, Ciconia. You don't need me to do that. I would rather you hear my own particular thoughts and not some guy whose opinion I don't agree with. Incidentally, this theory video about Ciconia, the guy makes some interesting points, but overall it's like, I don't want his words to influence mine, if that makes sense, you know? I do apologize about that. You didn't need me slurping away in your ears. But, this is actually part of the reason why I don't read reviews anymore. I don't want to be influenced by other people's opinions about a given thing. I don't want to hear about how, you know, Jimmy No Name from IGN or wherever, he didn't like Death Stranding 2 because he can't relate to the story about Sam and all that what goes on in there. You know, he thinks it's just like a waste of time, basically. I don't want to be influenced by other people's opinions this way. I want to have my own opinions. I want to try to convey my own thoughts and feelings, which is why I generally steer clear of reviews of things I'm tangentially interested in. There's this visual novel called Inescapable. It has a long subtitle, you've probably seen it, but basically in Inescapable, from what I can gather, the plot is it's a death game. There is a review that I saw where this person, in their video, it was just like, you know, Inescapable, the worst visual novel I've ever read, and it's like, I would like to read this at some point. I kind of don't want your opinion influencing me. It's also part of the reason why, like, I generally steer clear of people talking about the 100-line defense. It's like, I may not like how Danganronpa V3 ended, but I'm interested in this new game with its apparently 100 different endings, and it's, you know, a big, impenetrable wall of a game. Which I guess that makes sense since it's called, like, The Last Defense Academy, but, you know. I don't really want to hear other people's opinions, because we could agree on it, but I still sort of feel that if I play the game, but I heard the opinion that overall it's not that good because reason X, Y, and Z, even if I agree with it, I sort of feel like I was slightly influenced by that opinion. So it's like, what, did I really enjoy it, or was I just influenced by someone else that, you know, is my experience my own, or am I just merely parodying some guy? I'm really terrible about being recommended movies and so on, because, you know, friends will be like, you should watch this because I think you'll like it, it's really good, and it's like, maybe, and then I never get around to actually watching anything. You know, you should play this because you like that, and so on. You should read this because you read that. You've expressed an interest and fondness for card games, maybe you should play this card game, and it's like, I don't know. But I just generally steer clear of reviews of things I'm interested in because I don't really want to be influenced by... I don't want to have my own opinion swayed because of what someone else said. Like, it's terrible to admit, but we've all done this. There are times when I was younger, I would hear a review for some games that it doesn't even matter. Just use your imagination and just pick a game. And it's like, this game is actually like the worst thing ever. And it's like, oh, you know, have you played... People will be like, have you played this? Because it's good. And it's like, yeah, but I've heard that it was not good. And so I'm going with the person who said it was not good. And it's like, I don't want to do that. I want to have my own opinions about things. Does that make sense? This might just be down to insecurities, but it's like, I think I've gotten pretty good about being able to separate my opinion from other opinions. But it's like, at the time, it was just like, I don't want to hear basically anything about a given topic, because I want to be able to have my own thoughts and feelings about it. But I don't really like to look at reviews for things because I don't want to subconsciously, you know, put in someone else's words into my own review of a given item. So, like, Resident Evil Requiem, for instance, that's a great example. I generally like the game, but there are parts about it that I didn't care for. I didn't care for the one mandatory stealth section. I didn't like the fact that a lot of Grace's section was just extreme hide and seek. I still highly recommend the game because it's one of the better games to come out so far this year, but it's like a lot of people's reviews tend to just sort of gloss over this. Sorry about that. Basically, whenever I go quiet for like 5 seconds or so, you should just assume that I'm just coughing or getting some throat lube, so that way I can keep you hopefully entertained with my insane ramble. But, you know, I watched a review or two about Resident Evil Requiem, and it's just like, people generally just didn't like mention the things I didn't like, and they sort of downplayed it, and it's like, oh, was it really as bad as I remember? And then I go to replay it, and it's like, oh right, I don't like this part with Chunk, the big monster baby man. I don't like this part about where you have to sneak past the you know, the big woman, the big monster woman who can kill you in 2 shots if you're playing on hard. You know, people never also really disclose like what difficulty they're playing on, so it's like this thing is easy versus this thing is hard, and it's just like, well, were you playing on? What difficulty were you playing on? So I just sort of, you know, I like the game generally, but it's like, I don't know if it was really that great, you know? Like, I enjoy the Twitter posts about, you know, stupid sexy Leon, Scaredy Grace, and so on, but it's like, I don't really know if I need people's opinions about the game. This is actually kind of why I don't really want to play Crimson Desert. Like, people keep hearing all this, like, back and forth. Well, you did, up until people quit talking about it and moved on to the next thing. Where, you would have people talk about how, you know, the game's good because you can wander around for 150 plus hours without any real, like, mission objective telling you specifically what to do, what's the narrative, is there a narrative? That sort of thing, and it's like, it's a very inconsistent view that I've been hearing about that game, and it's like, reviews at the time, they're more or less just like, it's not good, and then you find out that, according to the brain trust of the internet, you know, these reviews are bad because they only played the game for 60 hours or so, and the game really gets going once you hit the 200-hour mark, the 120-hour mark, the 150, whatever. Pick a random absurd length of time. And it's like, you know, reviews can be like, this is the worst thing ever, and it's like, okay, but I would still like to try it, you know, in August, when theoretically it's at a more stable point where the game doesn't feel like it's actively falling apart at the seams just trying to run the damn thing. Which, who knows, maybe that's why you play it on console, because the console has... The console's the console, you have to make your game be able to run on a base PS5. A base Xbox, that sort of thing. There's not a lot of variance versus a computer. You know, I can read reviews for games like Crimson Desert and just sort of... Was that night 1? This is be really embarrassing if that was night 2. Must have been night 1. But, you know, reviews... I kinda don't really find much worth in them. Because, you know, your experience will vary greatly from mine. It doesn't matter if you're not even like one of these writers for one of the gaming outlets that still exists that has to review, you know, 12 games in a month. It's like, even if you were able to take your time, you're able to take your time and play, you know, 200 hours of Nightreign, here's my thoughts. My opinion on the matter is going to be much different than yours. Maybe I wouldn't enjoy this game as much if I didn't feel particularly burned by Monster Hunter Wilds, or just sort of let down by that game. You know, you might have a completely different opinion. You might be like, oh, this game's not that great because, I don't know, you pick a reason. Whereas I love this game because I think it's great that it's, you know, more Elden Ring. Which seems to be a contention point among people because it's like, I'm sick of the FromSoft formula, Dark Souls fatigue, Dark Souls fatigue. You need to make games that are, you know, Souls-like in action. But, you know, I personally, I eat that stuff up. So, your opinion is vastly different from mine. We could be 100% in sync about, you know, a game being good. You know, we could both feel like Neo 3 is the best of the Koei Tecmo Musou Core games ever. And my reasons why might differ from yours. I don't care for the switching between ninja and samurai mechanic versus, you know, just being able to have, you know, just create a mage or a ninja in Neo's 1 and 2, whereas in Neo 3 you can just like swap freely between your sword and board samurai with the katana or the odachi versus, and then just, you know, bam, you hit R2, you're swinging away with the Kasari Gama. Oh man, this is gonna sound so dumb, but I literally just used the Estus flask there because I was talking about Neo, and for some reason, for a split second, I forgot that I wasn't playing Neo. So it's like, I tried to hit a guy over the head with a sword, and it's just like, no, that's healing in this game, you know this. That's silly is what that was. What a silly turn of events. Or, you know, more likely, you could like a thing that I just hate, and it doesn't really matter the reason why. You know, you could like it because it does... let's use Neo as an example. You could love Neo 3 because it does the ninja samurai just hit R2 to swap between the two. And I could be like, wow, I'm knocking the game because of that very thing. Or, you know, what if you're looking for like a Baldur's Gate 3 type of CRPG, but you want like the real crunchy, in the weeds, super systems based mechanics of, you know, Pathfinder. You could love that game for that, whereas I hate the game because I think it's too in depth. It's too intense in its systems. That could be the thing you love, but the thing I hate, you know? Incidentally, that's actually one of the reasons why I really don't like the Pathfinder games. I just find them a bit too complex for my liking. I'm not saying every game needs to just be like, do everything for me. I'm a big baby who doesn't know how games work. But, you know, I think that there's a nice medium between, you know, the game doing literally everything for you versus throwing you in the pool of a bunch of mechanics and be like, well, figure it out. Figure it out, monkey. Of course, it also could just be because I really disliked the... What was it? It was like... you had to make a settlement run better, and like if enough of your people got mad, you would get like killed and thrown out of the settlement. It was sort of like Frostpunk, but you know, you also go out and you adventure, you've Pathfinder adventure, but there's also the settlement building mechanic where if you don't do certain like researches to figure out, you know, liches are weak to fire or something like that, or you didn't get a group of merchants to set up shop in the town. If you fail enough of these, the game's over, and then you're stuck. You know, I didn't like that system in Pathfinder Kingmaker, and I did a really bad job explaining it, by the way. There are probably people who could explain it way better than I did. But, you know, it's very, like, in-depth mechanically, but I hated it because if you didn't do the thing correctly, the game was over, and you would find yourself stuck in the final hours of the game with no way to, you know, get yourself out of the situation. And I didn't like that system, but if you played the game, you might love it. You might think that's your favorite thing in the whole damn game, for all I know. And then you find out that... Well, I find out anyways, that Wrath of the Righteous does basically the same thing except with an army. And it's like, oh, okay, it's good of you to let me know that I shouldn't bother. But again, this is one of those things that you see these reviews from big RPG fans, almost call them nerds, but where they love the system. They love the the army raising, mechanics, keeping everything afloat, you know, spinning those plates. I know for a fact I would hate that. So it's like, the reviews can say that it's, you know, the best RPG in the history of the medium, but I wouldn't know because I didn't like it the first time. I don't think I would like it the second time. So it's like, this is good for them, but I'm not going to I'm not going to bother. And of course, then the opposite happens. So, a reviewer will talk about how, you know, this game is bad because some inscrutable mechanic. They thought that, like, the shotgun felt weird. They didn't like the lack of a proper rocket launcher in Doom: The Dark Ages. Something like that. And it's like, okay, but that's like the one thing I did like, so we're at a stalemate, you and I. You ever have one of those moments where you're just thinking about the fact that you've been playing a game for however many hundreds of hours, and it's like, and they're just like, okay, you know how to play the game. You've clearly demonstrated that you know how to play the game. You've got all the trophies across 2 systems. But you think about the fact that there's some mechanic that you're just like blissfully unaware of. This happens to me all the time in these games. And Monster Hunter and just things like that. It's just like, alright, here is some particular aspect about like charm crafting in Monster Hunter Wilds. And it's like, I did not know any of that. The game tells you about it, but it's like, you could have fooled me. And then you're just like, oh, so that's why streamers, let's players, etc., you can see them play a game and be like, how did they miss something so blindingly obvious? And it's like, because that's just how it be. To tie it back somewhat to my other topic, you don't got that with visual novels, baby. You left click. Did you left click? You're doing it right. Did you right click? I guess you opened up a log. Or a menu to go to the log. Or the menu to look at just a screenshot. With no text. You don't have to worry about the deep mechanics of Fate Stay Night. You know? Tsukihime. Oh, I just had a terribly embarrassing thought. What if all this time I just had myself muted, and every single time I hit mute because I needed to cough or hork up some mucus or whatever, it turns out that's when I unmuted, so it's like 20 minutes of dead silence. Gross throat clearing noise. And then, you know, just the inverse of me talking versus mucusing it up and so on. It's like, man, that would be embarrassing. I would just delete OBS, delete my Twitch, delete everything. I'm getting off social media, I'm getting off the internet, I'm going away forever, goodbye, I love you. I'll see you in hell, that sort of thing. I should probably have helped them, but I need my money. and then again, it's not like I post anything worthwhile on social media anyway. I'm basically just a reblog factory. I'm genuinely surprised I've never been accused of being a bot. Well, AI in this case, in this day and age. Oh, I don't know how... I was about to say, I don't know how I'd feel about being accused of being a AI, but then I remembered that very thing happened at work. That was... I didn't know how to deal with that. It's just sort of... It threw me off. It shook me to my core. I don't think my voice is monotone like a phone system. What do I know, I guess? Who are we even fighting this time? I forget. But yeah, there's always, like, some mechanic. It doesn't matter what game it is. There's always something where it's like, I'll have sunk near 100, more than 100, however much time I've sunk into a given game, and then it's like, did you know that this... You're not playing Neo 3, stop it. Stop healing when you're full. But there's, you know, you play a game for an extended period of time, and then it turns out that you've been making life much more difficult for yourself because you forgot about some very obvious mechanic that the game went out of its way to even tell you about, but you just forgot because remembering things is hard. It happens a lot more than I care to admit. But, yeah. I'm done talking about reviews. I think I've tapped that well enough. We gotta move on. Mainly because I feel that it's just sort of like vague talking at this point. It's like talking about reviews and talking about X, Y, and Z, and it's just like, oh, well, you're clearly talking about this guy. Or this outlet. And it's like, no, I wasn't, but could I guess? Could I? I don't understand how people can possibly talk for hours at a time and never, like, run out of topics. It's just amazing to me. And without sounding like an insane madman, it's like, how do you do it? And I guess that's why I'm not a professional. That's why I've only recently started doing this less than a month ago. More than a month ago, I was doing this without even the courtesy of a microphone. All my chat communications with my chat was limited strictly to text boxes. Are we even gonna do well against the dogs? I don't know. I'm just abandoning that stuff. I have no use for it. So, but anyway, even if no one really gets anything out of my little rambles here, I get something out of them, and I guess that makes it all worthwhile, doesn't it? keeps doing this. My serpent staff is stronger now. Serpent Hunter, my mistake. Every time I wind up waiting for people to come to the door, I always think about just like hopping up on top of it just to wait for them there. Typically they don't care, but it's like, it amuses me to do, so isn't that really the point of it all? Amuse yourself with video games? So anyway, I say that a lot. It doesn't matter what the conversation is or where we are in the middle of the conversation, I will always usually drop a so anyway in there. Or an I remember back when this game first came out, how people were just like getting completely stumped by this guy. They could not, for the life of them, figure out how to get past tricephalos. Like that. They kept doing things like that, and hours, days, weeks would pass, and people would be like, how do I get past the first boss? How do I get past the first boss? And it's like, oh, well, have you considered not being bad at video games? And it's like, that's a bold strategy. Let's see if that one pays off. I need to actually heal. I was even feeling cocky because it's like, this is the tutorial boss, basically. It's like, how could we not get past him in the Deep at Night? I might finally get to level 3, so that way I can experience all of that. But then again, what do they say about pride? Twice the pride, double the fall? Yeah, that's right, we just got random Star Wars references over here. That was just sad. I figure we can try one last one. How's that sound, everybody? Okay, hopefully that's better. I must have known that I was about to try to switch over to just go fight Everdark Libra. We'll go Duchess again. Well, again, you guys didn't see that run. So anyway, I don't know if it really bothers anyone, the goals there on screen. I figured that after today, tomorrow, within the next stream or two, I'll take them down. I can just periodically refer to them. No need to leave them on screen all the time. It's taking up precious real estate. I do wonder if how people feel about visual novels written by authors from countries that aren't Japan. Like, I don't know if I've ever actually read any, but like Chinese visual novels, like do people like those? Do they think they're inferior? I know there's like this weird contingent of people who act like Doki Doki Literature Club, for instance, is the worst thing to ever happen to the medium since the last time. But it's like, I don't know, man. Is it just because it was popular? I know it's been called like the white savior of visual novels since some American guy wrote it. But it's like, okay, but like, what about visual novels from Russia, England, the Czech Republic, that sort of thing? It's like, do you similarly dislike those, or is it just because, you know, some cracker from California wrote it? I got taken out because of my California slander. I think I have a couple of, like, Korean VNs. You know, there's, like, Hate, an Analog Story. Anyway, one of the things that I started taking an issue with mid last year I'm kind of surprised this guy's not actually trying to kill me. Is, there's a lot of these visual novels that are, you know, pseudo horror stories, but it's all just like a metaphor for, you know, some form of mental illness. There's one that I read called, I think it was called something like Looking Up, I See Only a Ceiling, or something like that. And it's just like, it was a metaphor for depression, or imposter syndrome, maybe? But the whole point is, toward the end of the novel, there was, you know, a thrilling chase scene where our protagonist is getting chased by the monster, but the monster was just an allegory for like suicidal ideation, depression, suicidal ideation, imposter syndrome. You know, the whole gamut. And so I just noticed that a lot of these like indie, well, they're all indies, aren't they? Quite a few of these like dollar, they cost $1 VNs. They're just like a monster story, but the monster is depression. The monster is imposter syndrome. The monster is a reference to an abusive childhood, that sort of thing. Which, you know, that can work. But they're all just like very similar in their notion of, in the way they played out, where it was almost always invariably, you know, some young woman in a house, and then they become aware of some unspeakable terror just prowling the halls of their home. That was actually one of the reasons why I was so hesitant to read the visual novel Milk Inside a Bag of Milk Inside a Bag of Milk, because I thought it was going to just be another one of these. You know, the monster is your own mental conditioning, which it arguably is, but the novel at least had the decency to just be straight up about that fact. It tells you within the first few minutes that, you know, the girl, Milk-chan, she's not well, and how she's using the trappings of a visual novel to go try to get over her, like, social anxiety. And as a result, I respected it a lot more than looking up I see only a ceiling. There's plenty of these smaller novels that do this sort of thing, and it's just like, is it because they think visual novels are just like an easier, air quote, easier medium to write for? You know, you don't have to deal with gameplay mechanics, but also you don't have to really deal with a publisher publishing your book. So instead you just, you know, in some cases you just get like some free pixel art program to do the bare minimum visually. You write your novel in Twine. But Milk, though, it at least was straightforward about how, you know, she's not well mentally, and you, the audience, is basically just her talking her way through the situation. And then in the sequel, Milk Outside a Bag of Milk, Outside a Bag of Milk, she decides to try to examine her situation, her problems, using the logic of a point-and-click adventure game. Also, incidentally, that's when, you know, you get more of the specialized art for Milk-chan, and the game itself has like a grander production than when it was just a 2-bit visual novel. Whether or not you think that's a good thing is up to debate, but you know, it's got a nice little anime opening in the sense that it is actually animated and it looks nice, and it's not like an anime opening, if you know what I mean. It's just like, it's more or less a recap of the first game, since the first game can be beaten in 15 minutes. Finished in 15 minutes. You don't beat a book Well, maybe you don't. And then eventually, you know, the plot for milk outside of bag of milk happens where she's trying to you find out more about her situation, but the game never like patronizes you or condescends to the character itself by implying that because if you do the game well, you're able to solve her mental issues. You don't get to fix her brain, basically. But it's, just she's more or less trying to figure these things out, to try to sort herself out. And it does lean into a vaguely horror theme, but it doesn't try to sell it as a horror experience. You can read it as it's a horror experience because in the first one it's just black and red. That's the only color you got. You didn't get, bright colors. Whereas Milk Outside has more visuals to work with compared to the original. It's still, Milk-Chen more or less trying to come to some sort of terms about her situation. There's even an ending in the game that is just a one-to-one reference to the first game, which I liked. They're not particularly long games. Even if you read everything out loud to yourself, it would only take you to play through both games like about an hour. Unless you stopped to analyze every single aspect of the narrative. It would only take you roughly an hour. What even... You know what? Take that. Take that, Wilder. I got nothing. There's nothing for me here. I switched over to a class that would routinely get good drops, and I'm getting nothing again. I need to calm down. But I bought a bunch of these visual novels on Steam because there was some sale when isn't there? But it was specifically as the visual novel sale, and so I was like, oh, a lot of these are available for literal pennies, so why not? There's Fantasy Syndrome and things like that, and it's how many of these are going to just be that tired, dead horse trope of there's a monster, but the monster's depression? I know that it's reductive to say that sort of thing, but there's just so many of these types of games. It's you don't need to make some grand subversive novel that's about something else entirely. You can write what you know. Maybe you do just know you're struggling with depression. Some of these can be great, but it's a lot of the time, it's just... they're just not very well presented. So many of these that I've read, they try to present the idea that, depression is the real monster as some sort of, grand... no one's ever had this idea before. We're the only ones who's ever thought of this. you know, even back when all the troubles started with the internet at large, at least Depression Quest was just straightforward, you know? You know, say what you will about the game, no one ever does, but it's like, at least Depression Quest knew what it was going for. It wasn't trying to trick you. It wasn't trying to be the great subversive masterpiece where, you know, you think it's cute, but it's actually dark. That's its own particular... That's another trope that I don't particularly care for, where it's just like, what if the thing is cute, but the cute thing is actually secretly horrible? Not everything needs to be aversion. Not everything needs to be Doki Doki Literature Club. You can actually just, if you want to just do a visual novel about the character who's in love with the protagonist, the player character, and is manipulating them in some way, shape, or form, you can do this. These stories exist. I counted it as one of my favorite games of last year, but B-Side is that. Don't listen to that previous sentence if you never played B-Side and wanted to go in unspoiled. But, you know, you don't have to crouch your topic in just, you know, well, you don't have to obscure it under levels of irony. You can actually be genuine. You won't die if you do this. I don't even know if there's any of the items here to cure yourself from Deathblight. What the hell even had me? Oh, there it is. You gotta use your eyes. You gotta use your eyes, man. They gave you 5 senses for a reason. I don't know how you're going to use your sight, your sense of sight, your sense of smell and taste in this situation, but you have 5 senses. Use them. But visual novels, I feel, are just like a criminally underrated method of storytelling. Kinetic novels, sound novels, whichever you prefer. All the above. Higurashi, Umineko, and so on, they're classified as kinetic novels, but it's like, I really feel like these are vastly underappreciated as a way to tell a story. Sure, you could just say that it's just a novel. It's a novel that you click through in the same way that you just flipped pages. But, you know, I think that's downplaying the strength of the medium. You can control the narrative better in a visual novel compared to, you know, just a novel, a comic book, a manga, just a regular video game, a movie. You can control the narrative a lot better, a lot tighter than you could otherwise. In a regular novel, you can just flip through the book, you can flip to the very end and read the last paragraph or so of the book to find out what happens at the very, very end. Regardless of context, you can do this. I know people who who do this, and I don't understand them. But you can do this. There's nothing stopping you. There's nothing stopping you from grabbing a manga and just, you know, going to the last page and seeing the final panel of Attack on Titan, which the guy claims he wrote years before the actual finale. You know, there are all sorts of ways you can intentionally and unintentionally spoil yourself in these other mediums. With movies, you know, you could just... No, we're not doing that one.
I have your measure. It is done.
Should I have gone Faith? I genuinely don't know how to actually check to see like what scales with what in this game. I've only ever seen it in websites. You know, it's like, here's the list of what scales with Scholar, Duchess. And it's like, I don't know how to actually access that in this game. I'm stupid, I guess. But you take the various strengths of the various mediums. You know, movies, if you really wanted to, you could just fast forward through a movie. You could fast forward through a visual novel as well, but it's like, it's more in control of its narrative. With movies, regular video games, let's go with video games as an example here. If you're playing a big plot-based game, there's absolutely nothing to stop you from when you're watching a thing and it's like you need to be watching this guy stomp around. There's nothing to stop the player from having the camera over there. You know? There's nothing to stop you from being like, this is a very pretty bush, we're looking at the bush, I don't know what those guys are yammering about. It's conditional on you actually paying attention to what it's trying to do. You know, movies, you can more control the narrative compared to video games because you can show specifically what you want to show, what you think is important. But, you know, you can still miss things. You can just have it like, if it's a sound cue, you can have your TV muted. You can have your computer muted. You can be talking to someone. You could be just showing the things to the worst people and they're on their phone. Or they're, you know, playing Nightreign while listening to... Oh, what's a movie? What are movies that people watch? Because no one's going to know what the last American version is. But, you know what I mean. If you're watching a movie, you have to contend with your audience is just not paying attention. Whereas with visual novels, they can more control what the audience sees. If you know what I mean. If you can catch my meaning. You know, you can... Sure, you can, like... Fat thumb accidentally scroll past some important line or other, and you have to go back through the log to read it, but, you know, you can more control what your audience sees with a visual novel. There's one example that I love to go with. It's, I think it's episode 6 of Umineko. Spoilers for Umineko. In episode 6 of Umineko, Battler is the game master for that particular game board. And he's trying to prove that Erica isn't nearly as good a detective as she thinks she is, he can prove that, you know, there is more than 18 people on the island, or people didn't die the way she was claiming they died. So Battler is in the middle of, like, unveiling his masterstroke. He's like, here's how I can prove this. When the novel just sort of stops, it cuts to a black screen with red text on it that says... I think I might be misremembering. I might be mixing it up. But, like, he's trying to hint around that characters are alive. And so the game just sort of stops. And it, you know, it says, Kyrie Ushiromiya cannot save Battler because she's dead, which Battler didn't know. Like, the audience were just finding this out for the first time, that Erica went through and killed every single person who was part of Battler's big plan to reveal that he's in control of the game board and no one actually died. And it's just such a electrifying moment that it caught me off guard in a visual novel series filled with moments that just caught me off guard, that you can't really get away with in other mediums. There's an adaptation of Umineko that only covers like the first 4 chapters, the first 4 episodes, that I don't know if it would have done a good job with those even. Like, I don't know how it would cover to any sort of, like, good degree the amount of plot twists per minute in the answer arcs, especially in, like, Chapter 6, Chapter 7. If it were just adapted as, like, a regular 30 to 50 episode season of anime. Which is kind of why I'm curious about how the stage plays work. How can they possibly take everything that happens in Chapter 7, the Chapter 7 tea party, and put it into, like, a 2 to 3 hour just stage production? I know you gotta cut stuff, but it's like, unfortunately, Ryukishi's writing style, you can cut a lot of stuff because repetition is Umineko. But, like, I don't know how exactly you can take the plot of some of the stuff in Chapter 6, Chapter 7, and adapt it into something that's not its original medium. This is actually partly why I don't think video game adaptations work as movies. Even, like, the most straightforward plots, like, we have to go with something that actually has, like, a plot. You can't just point at Doom and say Doom. Like the Uncharted movie. That's probably a bad example because that's just adapting Indiana Jones. But, you know, you have to take the roughly, at minimum, 6 hours worth of story and just, like, chop and cut and put it as a 2-hour film. And it's like, I don't know why people want that. Even the most straightforward plots, you still have to contend with everything that happens in the game being a movie now. How are you going to convey gameplay mechanics in a movie? I would argue that you can't. Not well, anyway. one of my favorite game adaptations is the Prince of Persia movie that came out in like 2012-ish, 12 or so. It's not like a good adaptation. I just think it did a good enough job. But you have people who want to see adaptations of... There are people that want sequels to, like, Monster Hunter, and it's like, did you actually see the Monster Hunter movie? I don't think the movie's as good as you remember it, dude. Admittedly, this is probably not a good example on my part because I've never seen the movie. I refuse to watch it. Because you're taking just a gameplay heavy story game and you're isekaiing them? Is that what we're doing? But circling back to visual novels, you can... People like to complain about, like, the sex scenes in Fate Stay Night, the original sex scenes. I don't know if they're in the remaster remake that came out. I can only assume they did. That'd be... I don't know why they would cut those. But you can get more of a control of the narrative about what exactly you show in the sex scene with Saber, or I think Ryder or Rin Tosaka, than you would be able to if you just adapted it as a straight up anime and just... I can only assume they just straight up cut those scenes. I've never actually watched the Fate Stay Night adaptation either. Oh, who am I kidding? I'm just gonna punt those souls. Aww. Oh, this is disappointing. Oh, well. It was bound to happen because the other guys left. But, you know what? I kind of don't blame them. We're going to waive the penalty. Here's the penalty anyway. Make up your mind, game. My problem with these adaptations of visual novels is I feel that they don't really play to the strengths of the original that they're adapting, you know? Not to keep going back to this well, but in Euphoria, the game and the anime are so completely different to each other, they might as well be titled entirely separate things. The skeleton's the same. The skeletal structure of the story is the same. You know, they're kidnapped. Keisuke? I don't remember the kid's name. It's been a while, and I'm rereading it, but I forgot. There's a lot of K names in visual novels. the story's the same, more or less, where it's the guy and his class are kidnapped and put into Saw, but it's a sexual Saw situation. Those are more or less the same, but the anime is more... It's not even that the anime, like, waters down some of what happens in the visual novel. It's more to do with the fact that in the visual novel version of the story, you, the reader, are a more active participant in the events. In the anime, you get to just see the guy, the unlocking of the challenge room. You get to see that in a more typical hentai way. Whereas in the visual novel, you're a more active participant because you have to actually click through each action as they occur in the story. You don't necessarily, it doesn't necessarily, you're not clicking through to get literally each thrust. You're not befouling Rika's, I think her name is Rika. You're not befouling that one girl's food, if you know what I mean. But you're more... It's a more, for lack of a better phrase, intimate because you're there, more or less. Whereas in the anime, it's just you're seeing the guy do these things, and then just as quickly as it starts, it's over. When you have to go through the parts with the cult in the cave, it's a more interactive experience than just watching it happen on screen. I don't even know... I haven't actually watched the whole thing. For all I know, they actually cut this part, but like the bad endings, I'm pretty sure they're all non-existent in the anime adaptations. Which, that's just cowardice in my book. But it removes a certain amount of... It's more impactful because you're more deeply involved in the proceedings versus just watching it happen to just some kids, some guy and his classmates in, completely independent of you. You're just a passive observer. You're more an active participant by reading the visual novels. Like with Umineko and stuff like that, the story's happening no matter what. You're just more or less along for the ride. Which is true, but you're still an active participant in the events because you have to make the plot advance. You have to make Battler go examine the shed when the parents disappear on the first Twilight in Chapter 1. You have to deal with Natsuhi confronting Beatrice. In the anime, though, it's just... This is all stuff that just happens to someone else. Again, you're just a passive observer. My other issues with the adaptation aside. That's actually one of the reasons why I turned against the anime adaptation of School Days. Originally, I thought this was a great show. I enjoyed it for what it was, but I didn't know at the time when I first watched it that it was an adaptation of a visual novel. And once I learned that, I felt that that explains why some of the stories seemed kind of inconsistent. Because you're having to adapt just one particular arc, storyline, pathway. You know, the adaptation is just adapting the bad ending where the guy gets killed. Whereas if you're reading the book yourself, you get to choose. You're choosing which character to pursue, which red flag you want to ignore, that sort of thing. But in the anime, he's just full steam ahead on the bad decisions. Whereas if you're reading the visual novel, you're more actively having to make these choices yourself. So it makes more sense when the bad ends happen than if it was just, you know, suddenly the one girl kills the other one, for instance, or when they nice boat the boy. And it just, I feel that it does a real disservice to try to adapt these things, because sure, you can make the story do what you want. You can have the narrative be, you know, whatever you want it to be. You could just do a straight, pure adaptation of all the arcs in Higurashi, all the arcs in Umineko, all this in School Days, Fate, what have you. But you're missing out on your own personal involvement in the story. There we go. That's how you do it. That's how you kill a guy with arrows. And this is just purely from the aspect of a visual novel. I am not even talking about the typical trapfalls of adapting a video game into a movie or a TV series. You know, I haven't really watched it, but I'm given to understand that, like, the Fallout show is a pretty faithful adaptation of the universe of Fallout, but that's because it's more focused on telling its own narrative versus trying to strictly adapt, you know, any of the given Fallout games. Like, I know that in Season 2, they do just straight up have stuff from Fallout New Vegas in there. It's more like reference heavy that way, but for the most part, from what I understand, it's more, they're just like, it's exploring more of the world and the idea of Fallout versus than if they just made like a straight adaptation of the Vault Dweller from Vault 13's got to go get the water chip. You know, that's different. Also, I haven't watched The Last of Us, but, you know, I'm given to understand that the better episodes are the ones that are telling an original story and aren't just recapping the games. I don't know the episode offhand, but I hear that the episode about the character Bill is a better episode than most of the show that's just like a pure, straightforward one-to-one of... Wow, I have a lot of junk in here. Get out of here. That's better than that's better than just like the pure one-to-one adaptations of scenes that happened in the game. Like, I know that apparently the plot twist, the event from The Last of Us Part 2 happens in Season 2, but I have heard more stuff about some of the original ideas that were done in Season 2 versus just when it was a more straightforward retelling of the game, you know? But with visual novels, they more tightly control the narrative compared to basically any other medium that I can think of. You can play with the space better than if you did just write a novel. Like, I know they exist in Japanese, they're not in English, because why would they be? I know that there's like the light novel adaptations of Higurashi, Umineko, Fate, and so on, and it's like, I can only imagine that those are miserable to read. You know, the manga adaptations are probably fine for the most part. I recall liking the manga adaptations of everything in Matsuribayashi, for instance, but it's like, I don't think it's a good replacement for the visual novel itself. Like, people love the Umineko manga, particularly the chapter that talks about the culprits, motives, and all that, but it's like, I don't think it would be very good as a replacement to the actual visual novel itself. Oh, shit. I wasn't even trying to fight that guy, he just showed up out of nowhere. You know, because a visual manga, you can show more, literally show more of the events from the visual novels. You can, you know, actually show, like, Beatrice's motives better. You can get a better feel for the conspiracy in the Tea Party in Chapter 7, but it only really serves to, like, augment the story presented in the visual novel, in my opinion anyway. It's kind of why I'm curious about the upcoming adaptation for Silent Hill F. that's getting a manga adaptation, and I don't know how well that's going to use the medium. Because you can hand wave and fan wink away that the gameplay stuff in Silent Hill F is because it is a more like literal interpretation of game mechanics by virtue of the story. You know, Hinako is able to run a million miles without, you know, needing to stop for a breath. She's able to swing a pipe and kill these guys because she was on the track team. You don't really got to worry about that in a manga. You can just sort of cut that stuff out because, well, you're not going to have very many running scenes, are you? Another thing that makes me curious about the manga adaptations of Silent Hill F is it came out recently that the script for Silent Hill F used roughly 60% of the ideas that Ryukishi put in his script. Like, they had to cut nearly half of it out. Now, apparently this might have just been, like, gameplay stuff. Like, apparently they wanted to have the UFO ending be its own little playable game section. Which, okay, that could have been fun, but, you know, I wonder how much of it was, like, actually, like, narrative that they cut. Are they gonna put some of that stuff in the adaptation, in the manga adaptation? I doubt it. I don't think that they're going to put in 5 separate endings into a book, into a manga. No one is brave enough to do that. Which makes me wonder about the actual, like, novel adaptation. How was that? I don't know if that ever came out in English. Again, I doubt it. So many of these adaptations only ever come out in Japanese. But remember, you're killing the industry if you pirate. If you pirate manga, you're killing the industry. It's like, great, you want to make it available in English then? No? Then shut up. Oh, right. I was trying to figure out what the hell. I thought this was an executor. I completely forgot that the Undertaker got the brass armor. So I was confused for a second. Local man confused by cosmetics. There's one example of a thing that I think handled the what I feel is like a good use of the medium that's not like a video game, movie, book, etc. And it was, of all things, a horror story on the internet. I don't remember necessarily what it was called, but I remember that the thing about the website was, it was basically like this guy's walking home alone at night, and there's like maybe a ghost tailing him, and then as you're reading it, because you got to scroll down, eventually, if you're on browser, I don't know, I can't imagine that this worked at all in today's world of smartphones. As you're scrolling, like, the scroll just, like, it grabbed the scroll bar on the website and just, like, ripped it down. So it basically performed like a really effective jump scare. And that's just like the one thing that I can think of that played with the medium really well. That I don't know how you can get that anywhere else. Because, like, horror games with jump scares, you can do whatever. You can grab the camera and just, you know, roar into their perspective all day. You can give them the white woman jump scare or the ghost. I think Silent Hills PT did that pretty well. But it just, that wouldn't work as anything else, so would it? Which is kind of my point. You got to play to the strengths of your medium. So you have people that have the reductive thought that, you know, visual novels are bad games because you're just clicking, you're pushing A, you're pushing X, etc. And it's like, yeah, if you really want to get down to brass tacks, I guess that is what you're doing, but there's so much more to it than that. And so these games and movies that try to be something else, some other medium, it's like, what's the point? Just make that then. Who cares about this if you wanted to really make that? If you wanted to make a movie, just make a movie. I know that you're not going to be able to do it because you have to actually have people who are willing to pay to have the thing made, but it's like, independent movies exist. I'm not saying it would necessarily pan out very well, but it's like, you've got to have something going on with your creative idea that you want to express with it that you can't really do elsewhere. Like, okay, so going back to it, Higurashi, I know, we're talking about Higurashi again, it will happen again. It'll probably keep happening. Well, first of all, they keep giving him money to make things that are Higurashi related, so it's like, of course I'm gonna talk about it. But, like, the sequel animes, So and Gotsu, Go and Sotsu, I don't mind those because those are just sequels to the series, you know? It's willing to tell its own original story. It's willing to play with the medium of, you know, characters talking and actually being able to express things and not just rely on text. So I don't mind necessarily that we have new stupid ideas about how Satoko created Eua, because it's like, it's a kind of interesting idea because it's trying to use the anime medium. I think, like, Haworthia is an interesting concept. This is a proto version of Ciconia that existed purely as just like a drama CD. I think that was an interesting idea. So I'm willing to give these sorts of things the benefit of the doubt because they're trying something new. They're not just trying to take a story that already existed in one medium and just transplant it over to the new one, you know? Like, I don't know how well they actually are. I didn't watch very many of the episodes. Umineko, I don't think is going to do particularly well as just a pure, straightforward anime. First of all, I don't even think they got the music from the games in there, which that's a real head scratcher. Why would you do that? If there's one thing that a lot of people know about Umineko other than the art style, is the soundtrack is an absolute, like, that makes the series. Cutting that is like cutting the story entirely. But, like, this actually works out pretty well because there's, in the anime, the manga versions of Umineko, there is a story that got into the history of the culprit. You know, it was more like a expansion of the story of the story with, I think her name is Claire, who, you know, explained some of what was going on to justify the killer's killing of the Ushiromiya family. So with the manga, you got more interactions from, like, Kraus, Natsuhi. They would talk about, you know, the character in the past before they found out who they were. So it's a more interesting way to explain the story than the visual novel, in the sense that it's expanding on it. Oi. If it were just like a pure, straightforward, like, adaptation of, you know, this is how they did it, this is what actually was going on during this scene or that scene, I probably wouldn't be so generous and willing to give it the benefit of the doubt. But since it's trying to just, like, build upon and expand upon the origin of the Rokenjima killer, I'm willing to give it the benefit of the doubt. Like, they did eventually just, like, adapt the chapter itself as a chapter in the Switch version of Umineko, and I don't know how well that worked. I have hesitated rereading that because I kind of want to go through the whole series again, but I want to try to, like, forget most of the plot developments. Oh, I thought my ult was ready. Because I had an issue with, when I was reading Higurashi Chapter 1, I only ever saw like the first few episodes of the anime at the time, so when I was going through the visual novel, which is just the first 4 episodes of the anime, I didn't really care for it. I was getting pretty fed up with the glacial pace of the novel. So I'm kind of trying to wait and see if I can get Umineko to just sort of like more or less leave my memory. I know it won't because that series left such an indelible mark upon me, but I'm an optimist, what can I say? Also, I can't help but feel that these sorts of impromptu me talking about my writing process actually does help, because I feel that this helps me organize my thoughts better, so I can present them as a more better thought out way than with the rambling nonsense that I've been subjecting you to today. It will happen again. Oh, the other we're down a guy. I didn't even notice. Oh, we're not even gonna get anywhere close to doing this. This isn't me and that one recluse who... How the fuck? Okay, I'll take it. The problem with the way I try to write my various things, my little essays, is I try to do it as like a straightforward, you know, linear sequence. I don't like to go and talk about one aspect of a thing and try to go back and try to tie it all together. Inevitably, that is sort of what happens. Like, there are times in the Higurashi playthroughs where I'll just, like, need to talk about a thing that happens way later on in a chapter versus where we are right now in the narrative. Also, I try to just have all of my chapters ready to go so that way I can present them in a more clear-cut way than, you know, piecemeal weekly, let's say. I don't know why I went with weekly. But yeah, I occasionally hear about how people think that visual novels are not a good storytelling medium because you're just reading a book, and it's like, first of all, what's wrong with books? What's the matter? Are you afraid to read something? And, it's just wildly discrediting the medium as a whole, I think. Dang it. I feel that you can really tell the story better if you're able to have a more tight grip on it. Which, if you're trying to tell a complex narrative, you this safety net. You can't have people miss a plot point because they were busy looking at the roots of this phantom Erd tree, for instance. You have to actually make sure you need to be able to command their attention. And unfortunately, with just a regular video game, you're going to have people that will miss things because they were, you know, sidetracked looking at the ground because they're trying to trinket scrounge. They missed something because they were in the middle of looking at some, like, silly graphical glitch. Or something like that. They were doing jumping jacks in the corner of the room with their character. That's kind of why I think that the walking simulator genre, I kind of think that's not a very good way to tell stories either. Just because of that reason. You can have a deep, impactful story about, you know, 2 park rangers in wherever the hell Firewatch is set. You can do that all you want, but it's like, at the end of the day, you're really trusting your audience to just, like, pay attention to what's going on, and you can't guarantee that. You need to be able to more or less lead them by the nose and have them look at exactly what you need them to look at. Which, in a video game, you can't do. You know, people get distracted. They don't care. They don't care about the story in the video game. In which case, why are you playing a story-based game in the first place, then? But, you know, with a visual novel, you can more direct their attention. You can control the pace of the narrative.
I have your... It is done. The time is right.
I wonder if this guy took anything. I routinely take items from Libra. I'm not a good player. I get easily tempted by the devil. So that you need to be able to control where exactly people are looking. You need to be able to control, try to manipulate what you want them to feel. And you can't really do that with a traditional video game. There are plenty of great story-based games out there. I won't deny that, but it's really... It's more that the great storytelling games are at a minimum compared to the great gameplay mechanic games. I mean, you are here to interact with the game, and, you know, gameplay is what you're really here for. You're not here necessarily for a story. Which is fine, I think. I don't know if a game like Disco Elysium would have been better off as a visual novel compared to the RPG we got, for instance. But, like, you really have to work hard to make sure that your audience is able to actually, like, absorb the story. You have to work really hard to make people care about the story in the video games. Death Stranding, for instance, has a very deep, emotionally resonant finale, in my opinion, that affected me greatly when I saw it. But it's like, most people won't care about that. Because you're having to work against the idea that people are actually, you know, getting into the story instead of just Norman Reedus is, you know, building the great UCA highway system made of zip lines and chargeable roads. You know, you have to actually hope that people are willing to do this. And most people aren't. Sad as it is to say. Because, you know, they view the story as an obstacle to them getting back to the game. They don't want to be involved in a grand narrative. You know, they just want to clack their buttons and, you know, fight big monster. I mean, who doesn't? I want that. I want to fight big monster. I want to see number go up and I want to hit big monster with a sword. Like, as much as people like it, I don't know if anyone really thought that the story of Baldur's Gate 3 was a particularly great story. I think it was a pretty good one. But I don't know if people generally think that Baldur's Gate 3 had, like, a particularly grand story, like a good story. You know, for as much as everyone loves to ship the various characters with one another and their OC. But, you know, you have to be able to... Well, of course you left the world, we just lost. I hate to break it to you guys, but you're still losing those points. You know, for as much as you... The problem with trying to tell a deep emotional story, a deeply moving or intelligent story with a video game is you have to contend with the gameplay notion aspect of the game itself. You can't just ignore that. You can try all you like, but eventually you have to engage with the game mechanics themselves. Like, eventually you have to deal with the fact that people aren't going to want the particularly deep narrative. They're going to just want to shoot the iron menial for 10 minutes straight. They want to keep, you know, stabbing him with your little Iron Eye knife, your big Iron Eye ultimate. And they're not really here because they care about the story of Nightreign. That is, unfortunately, a reality you have to contend with. Of course, I'm not saying Nightreign is a deep story. It's not a story game. story is very definitely just like in the back seat here. But take a game like Fire Emblem Three Houses, for instance. Fire Emblem Engage, the new one that's coming out. Those generally do have really good stories. I am one of the only people on the face of this planet who will actually say that the Dynasty Warriors, Fire Emblem Warriors spinoff, Fire Emblem Three Destinies, is actually one of the best written action games I have played. But, you know, at the end of the day, you also have to just go back to the fact that you're here to kill, you know, 1 billion guys a minute per level. You're not necessarily here because you care about the story of the OC for Three Destinies or the new narrative presented in Hyrule Warriors. You know, eventually you have to accept the fact that people are here to just watch Link swing a sword at 1 million billion moblins. Again, I'm not saying these are particularly deep narratives, but even in the deepest narrative game, think of the most like story-rich, story-heavy game you can think of. Eventually, you do have to contend with just the gameplay. Eventually, as much as you like exploring the emotional turmoil of James Sunderland, who's trying to find his dead wife, his wife who died, eventually you do have to contend with the fact that the game needs to be played. You have to acknowledge the fact that you do need to, you know, at the end of the day, hit a bunch of monsters with a pipe. Heather Mason can go on her, you know, life-affirming story that has to deal with the traumas of being a young woman, but eventually you do have to contend with the fact that you will have people who just want to kill God with a katana. They just want to take a machine gun and shoot the monsters. And when you take away that ability, it's like, why did you even bother then? I don't know necessarily how you would mix the story of a Silent Hill into the gameplay. Like, it's kind of a hard thing to do. But you have to do that. You have to try to... You can try to marry the two. But at the end of the day, gameplay in the video game is slightly more important than story. As much as no one wants to admit it. Eventually, you do have to contend with the fact that people do want to do things. They want to roll the dice in Citizen Sleeper. They don't want to just read about how the station's falling apart. You have to be able to do things in your narrative about, you know, the woman who's stuck alone on a space station and there's an AI watching her. Eventually, you will want to take your gang of Persona kids into the dungeon. The fighting dungeon. The other dungeon, I can support as well. But, you know, you have to... You can't separate the two. If you do that, you might as well just make it a manga, an anime. And there is an anime adaptation of the last 3 Persona games. They weren't very good. You know, you can focus on the important plot threads of the Mementos dungeons. You can do that. You can skip the gameplay entirely of the one Haru's dad, the space level. You can skip that and just make the story, the story beats happen, and you don't have to engage with the gameplay stuff, but you do in the video game. You know? So trying to just like divorce the game entirely and just focus purely on narrative, I think is a fool's gamble when it comes to story games. If you're doing that, you might as well just make a visual novel. Silent Hill: The Short Message isn't a very good game. I will not lie to you and say that it's, a grand, deep story. But it might have performed better if it were just like the play novel from the original Game Boy Advance version of Silent Hill 1. Instead of having to deal with trying to maneuver your way around the monster at the end of the game, maybe it would have been better off if this was all just described via paragraphs of text. I'm not even necessarily saying that you need to make like a pure, like a show version, because they made a Silent Hill show. Silent Hill Ascension is not a great example of being able to just like divorce the story from the gameplay of a Silent Hill entirely. Instead, you got plot points that come up in the narrative, show up once, and then eventually just sort of get like patched out. There was a scene toward the end of the show, I don't remember which episode it was exactly, but the main character basically gets like seduced in more ways than one into joining the cult of Not Silent Hill. And then there is an orgy scene. Shortly after a broadcast, they cut that scene entirely. They instead changed it to just like the 3 or 4 characters were having a conversation in a room, and then eventually they just sort of left. And then it carried on like it did in the original. And then you have these scenes in Ascension that were trying to put in like the threat of the monster killing one of our protagonists in what would have probably been a not particularly good video game version. But instead it's just like all pre-rendered cutscenes, and it kind of looks bad. And it just didn't work. Silent Hill 2, either of them, wouldn't work as just like a pure, just as like a thing that you watched. I'm not even saying this as a dig at Return to Silent Hill. Silent Hill 2 doesn't work as just like a passive story because you have to engage with the actual gameplay. Fighting the monsters, as much as people don't like to admit it, is important to the narrative. it's not the same game, obviously, but people like to poke fun at Vincent in Silent Hill 3 for saying they look like monsters to you, and it's just like, make you think, don't it? But it's like, it's kind of the point, I think. James is trying to, in his mind, fight through hell and high water to find what happened to Mary. You know, the metaphor, you could say that the monsters are like a metaphor for him trying to delude himself. Like, it's the truth of the situation, trying to convince him that he's, lying to himself that Mary's still alive. You could say that, but you still need to have him, fight the monsters. You can't just have him drive up to Luke Lake and then just, go without issue to the hospital, go without issue across the lake. You need the narrative stakes. You need to have the combat. And obviously no one really went to Silent Hill 2 for like a deep combat system. I don't think anyone at the time was trying to make it the next, like, Metal Gear Solid. But, you had to have something in there to justify what he was going through. But this wouldn't work as just a pure, straight, only narrative, no gameplay. You could absolutely watch on YouTube Silent Hill 2, the movie. That's just all the cutscenes strung together. That is an infinitely worse way to engage with the story of Silent Hill 2 than even if you compared it to just like watching just, a gameplay video compilation playthrough without commentary. If you decided you really didn't want to play the game yourself, but you were just curious about how Silent Hill 2 goes. It wouldn't, it's not a great way to experience the game. I think you should probably try at least once to experience a game you're interested in yourself. But even if you wanted to just experience the story, I think you're better off watching a full, Let's Play of Silent Hill 2, Silent Hill F, whatever, than just watching game titled the movie. Because you're missing some vital context, not even necessarily in in the Silent Hill games case, you're missing the grabbing of the files. You don't even necessarily need to read the files to be able to fully appreciate the game. I just think that you're doing yourself a disservice if you decide to find out what happened in a game and you just look up the game, the movie. Fast forward through gameplay sections if you really must, but it's you need to understand this is part of the experience. You need these sections to try to make the story parts more resonant, and you need that. You need something because it offers release, if nothing else. But, you know, Silent Hill 2, Silent Hill F, as much as I love these games, Silent Hill 3, I love the story in these games. I don't think they're particularly well served. They would be particularly well served if they were presented as just like a more passive experience. But meanwhile, Umineko wouldn't work as, you know, a walking simulator investigate around Rokinjima. I don't think it would work like that. I don't think Higurashi, Ciconia, Umineko, Higginbana, most of these visual novels, I don't think they would work if they were an Ace Attorney game. People try to say that they're basically the same thing, but they're really not. Ace Attorney and adventure games like that, they are dependent on being able to investigate the world around you. You need to be able to, like, miss clues on your first pass. So eventually when you do get the big aha moment, it's much more satisfying than if it just passively gave it to you. So a story like Umineko wouldn't really work that way, because what exactly would you try to find in, I don't know, Chapter 7? Like, you're trying to solve a locked room mystery. It's like, how would that work? Would there be, like, witch vision? That would make this series so much worse. Whereas, as it is, the visual novels, the games, they directly have control of what you see. You know, what's on screen. There might be, like, some hidden little item in the background, but it's like, it more guides you to it than if you were able to investigate, you know, the aftermath of the first Twilight. You know, I don't think that there would be any tangible benefit to being able to, you know, cruise around Ushiromiya Manor and just, like, gawk at the portrait of Beatrice on the stairs. I just don't think that would benefit anything. So you make it a visual novel where you're able to just, you know, you have the plot going on, you can have the portrait of Beatrice in the background, but it's not necessarily like you need to go hunting it down. And so I just sort of feel that these people that say that visual novels are bad for storytelling, I feel that they have a fundamentally flawed view of how stories should be told. At least by the medium of video games. If you want to just, you know, visual novels or video games. they're trying to make visual novels be on the same footing as a regular video game or like Myst. And it just doesn't really work. There were novels written for the Myst series. They weren't particularly good either. Whether or not that comes down to just the story for Myst isn't a good story, or it wasn't told well because it's just a straightforward plot, it kinda helps illustrate my point. So, but people, they love to joke and say that, you know, the thrilling gameplay of a visual novel, you're pushing that A button, and it's like, well, yeah, but you're doing literally the same thing when you read in any shape, really. And I just feel that it's just, I don't understand why they're looked down upon so heavily compared to any other method of telling a story. You got 20 minutes there. I mean, for all I know, I probably just sound like, maybe, I'm sure someone out there will hear my words here and they will think that I am, in fact, just being a very pretentious son of a bitch, and I'm overblowing the importance of visual novels compared to everything else. And that very well may be the case. But I really feel that they're just greatly underappreciated compared to other methods of storytelling. Like, I'm not saying that everything needs to be a visual novel. Not every story needs to be told via a visual novel. You can absolutely just have, you know, your gameplay and your story together. You don't have to separate the two. But you just have to do something with the medium that you're trying to tell your story in. Like, if you're trying to tell your story, just hypothetically, to pull an example out of thin air, if you were trying to tell a dramatic story about a guy who was cheating on his wife, but then it turns out that the person he's cheating on his wife with was cheating on her husband with the protagonist, but the husband himself was cheating on the wife with some other man. You have to be able to convey these plot points audibly, not necessarily through video. You can certainly have, like, a music video with your story, but it's like you have to have the story be able to stand on its own just as a pure audio experience. You know, you can have the fun part of the story where a different character who's cheating on their wife is throwing around a little person on a kitchen table because he found out that the wife cheated on him with the little person named Big Man, but you really need to be able to have it stand on its own. At least audibly. This is ironically why I think one of the better ways to interact with books is audiobooks, believe it or not. You know, audiobooks, books in themselves are good because more people should read. I think that it's a fun, like, mental exercise trying to establish character voices in your own head. What you think a character actually looks like, what they actually sound like. You know, with adaptations that come out later, it's like, oh, Eddard Stark is just Sean Bean, for instance. That was the very first example I could think of, I'm sorry. You know, Deckard from Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is just Harrison Ford. But if you're reading the book, you have to try to decide for yourself what exactly the character sounds like, you know, their verbal intonations, that sort of thing. Vocal intonations, I think that's what I meant to say, not voible. But with audiobooks, you can actually take some of that heavy lifting off of yourself and just have it, you know, done for you. You can have... oh, what's... Simon Vance. You can have Simon Vance tell you, you know, this is what was happening in Dune. The hard slap of the ejaculate, that sort of thing. You can do that because you don't need necessarily to try to, you know, marry the concepts, the warring states of visual and audio. You know, you're just removing some of the work from yourself of trying to imagine what these people sound like. The narrator sounds like, that sort of thing. So sometimes, you know, you have the narrator, the person reading the book. It's like, sure, they are voicing every single character, and so every single character will just sound like them, but at least it's consistent. You know, it's not having to take extra steps to have the story work from one medium to the other. At least that's what I think about that. Again, though, this might just be me being a pretentious bastard, but I think that it helps the fictionally, non-fiction books. Those are non-fiction's non-fiction. We're just talking about fiction here. You know, those are better served by the medium of just, you know, a person reading the book at you, to you, etc. I do hope that, one, someone actually watches this, and I hope that you get something out of it. Even if it's just a deepening worry that I am unwell and don't know what I'm talking about, who can't separate, you know, fiction from reality. I hope you got something out of this. Says it all, really.